Hello and welcome back to the Stories of Northern Life podcast, brought to you by the Sault Ste. Marie Museum. I'm your host, Nicole, and today I bring you an episode on the Edmund Fitzgerald. So this year marks the 50th anniversary of the sinking of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And with that, I just wanted to talk about the Edmund Fitzgerald a little bit more and look more at her story. So if you're from the area, you probably know the song The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald by Gordon Lightfoot and know that she sank on November 10th, 1975. But let's start and look a little bit more at her history. So she was launched on June 7th, 1958 in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. She was owned by Northwestern Mutual Life Insurance Company and named after the board president. And this was the first such investment by an American life insurance company. They had built her at 729 feet, just within a foot of the maximum length allowed for the St. Lawrence Seaway. And at the time, she was the longest ship on the Great Lakes and was actually given the title of Queen of the Lakes until September 17th, 1959, when the SS Murray Bay was launched. Now, the Fitzgerald weighed 13,632 tons. She was valued at $7 million US at the time, which would translate to roughly 110 million Canadian in 2025, so today. She had a deadweight capacity of roughly 26,000 tons, meaning that's how much weight she could carry. That included fuel, cargo, provisions, and crew. She had a 3 cargo holds and 21 watertight cargo hatches. And now each of these hatches was topped with a 7-ton sheet and had 68 clamps that had to be tightened manually. And it said that it took roughly about half an hour to seal up each hatch. She was originally coal-fired, and the boilers were converted to burn oil in the 1971-1972 winter layup. And then in 1969, the ship's maneuverability was actually improved with the installation of a diesel-powered bow thruster. She had 7,000 horsepower steam turbine with a speed of 16 miles per hour. She was a luxurious ship. There was thick carpeting or like deep pile carpeting, so like really nice thick carpet. They had tile washrooms, 2 guest staterooms, curtains for all of the port windows. So she was a very fancy ship. During her christening and launch on June 7th, 1958, over 15,000 people were in attendance. But it wasn't exactly easy going. So the wife of Edmund Fitzgerald, like the ship's namesake, christened the ship. But apparently it took 3 tries to break the champagne bottle. Not really a good sign. And then the crew was struggling to release the keel blocks, so the blocks that were holding her up while they were building her. And then the ship went in sideways, and when she was going in, it sort of launched at a perilous angle, and this created a huge wave that crashed over the pier, and then the Fitzgerald smashed into the dock, and it was such a shock and everything that one of the spectators actually had a heart attack and died. So that was her very first day in the water. So not really a good start for the poor Fitz. Oakle Bay Norton Corporation was the one who operated the vessel, and they actually designated her the flagship of its Columbia transportation fleet. She set records for the heaviest load ever carried on the Great Lakes and the fastest run for a ship of her size. In 1964, she was the first ship on the Great Lakes to carry more than 1 million tons of ore through the Soo locks. So, yeah, she was pretty impressive. She was a well-known ship along the Great Lakes. She carried taconite, so this is sort of unrefined iron ore. So they come in little pellets, and so sometimes you'll hear that she was carrying taconite, or you'll just hear that she was carrying iron ore. Pretty much, it's the same thing. Taconite is just like more of that unrefined iron ore. And so she was going from usually Minnesota or Wisconsin to ironworks in like Detroit and Toledo. That was sort of her main routes that she would sort of bounce between. She had a number of nicknames. So the Fitz, Mighty Fitz, Big Fitz, the Titanic of the Great Lakes, and the Pride of the American Side. And so this is what we all hear in the Gordon Lightfoot song. And so that's why in the song he says that, because that was one of her nicknames, was the Pride of the American Side. So when you're listening to the song, now you know that little tidbit of information. And so it could take anywhere from 4.5 to 6 hours to load the ship, and like up to 14 hours to unload. And now they say it could take 5 days to travel from port to port. But then I also heard that her last trip was supposed to take about 47 to 48 hours. So maybe that 5-day travel was like there and back. And she would make about 47 trips per season. And so the like a year of lake service consisted of 10 months aboard and 2 months off. So the season would be traveling from when all the locks open up in the spring to when they close up in the winter months. So when the Fitzgerald sank, she was pretty much closing in on the end of the season. It only required 29 men to operate the freighters, so that's why all the crew on the lake freighters all had 29 men. Guests were also welcomed aboard, and they received the VIP treatment. So as I said, she was a very luxurious ship, so they actually had a bunch of guests on her during her 17 years on the water. And some fun things people remember about her was that an earlier captain, Peter Pulser, was actually known as the DJ captain, as he had music piping through the intercom day and night when passing through the St. Clair and Detroit rivers. And then when going through the Soo locks, he would actually go out and he would go on the bullhorn to entertain the visitors and provide commentary on the Fitz. In 1969, she received a safety award for 8 years of operation without a time off for work or injury. But then she ran aground in 1969, collided with the SS Hochelaga in 1970, struck the wall of a lock in 1970, 73, and 74, and she lost her original bow anchor in the Detroit River on January 7th, 1974. Now, this all doesn't sound good, but none of these accidents were serious or actually indeed unusual for a lake freighter. And like these freighters were built to last for like over half a century. And she was only 17 years old. Now, during her last voyage, she was captained by Ernest M. McSorley, who was aged 62. And his wife had actually recently had a stroke and was moved to a nursing home. He promised her this would be his last run and he would return home to her. But he was never able to do that. Now, the final voyage. So it began at the Burlington Northern Dock 1 in Superior, Wisconsin. They took about 6 hours to fill the ship, and then it took about, again, half an hour to seal each of the hatches, as I said, with the 68 clamps. And they set off a little after 2 p.m. on November 9th, 1975. And now an interesting thing with this was a Sunday, and this year November 9th actually falls on a Sunday as well. So not only is this the 50th anniversary, but the days of the week actually line up too. So she was en route to the steel mill on Zug Island near Detroit, Michigan. And apparently there's a discrepancy surrounding the weight of the iron ore she carried. We'll cover that a little bit more in the next episode when we start to examine like the different documentaries and things that are researching the mystery surrounding her. But we have like Wikipedia listing 26,116 long tons, 29,250 short tons, or just 26,535 tons. So whatever, it's around 26,000 tons, and that's what's listed in the Gordon Lightfoot song too, so that's usually the number we kind of stick around. And now it was said that the load she was carrying could have made up to about 7,500 vehicles. So around 5 p.m. on November 9th, they met up with the SS Arthur M. Anderson that was captained by Jesse B. Bernie Cooper. And at this time, the weather forecast reported that a storm would pass just south of Lake Superior by 7 a.m. on November 10th. The SS Wilfred Sykes, who was actually loading opposite the Fitz, but left at 4:15 on November 9th, so a little bit after her. And they actually decided it was better to take a northern route to take advantage of the protection of the North Shore. And he was actually listening into the radio chatter between the Fitz and the Anderson. So the Fitz and the Anderson were discussing like taking the regular Lake Carrier Association downbound routes. So that was pretty much straight through the middle of Lake Superior. But then the National Weather Service updated their forecast at about 7 p.m. And this included gale warnings for the whole of Lake Superior. Therefore, the Fitz and the Anderson decided to head north in search of shelter along the Northern Ontario shore. And so they were predicting that the winds would come more out of the northeast, and so they felt that going along the North Shore would be able to give them that protection from the winds, and so that's why they were sort of going closer to the North Shore. The Fitzgerald and the Anderson encountered the storm at about 1 a.m. on November 10th. So this was Monday. The Fitzgerald was reporting winds of 96 kilometers per hour and 3-meter high waves. The Sykes heard Captain McSorley reporting that he was reducing speed due to the weather and trying for some lee from Ile Royale. So this was basically he was kind of trying to look for shelter and sort of riding with the winds, and that's sort of what lee is. And so the Sykes captain later said that he was sort of stunned that McSorley was talking about slowing down, because McSorley was never a captain that was known to slow down. At about 2 a.m., the gale warning increased to a storm warning. So this means that there were higher winds. The Fitzgerald was following the Anderson at about 12.7 knots, but around 3 a.m., the faster Fitz pulled ahead. The storm center passed over then, and the wind changed from the northeastern to south to the northwest. And this was really bad for her. The snow was said to begin around 2:45 p.m. and they lost visibility. The Anderson lost sight of the Fitz. That was about 26 kilometers ahead. Just after 3:30 p.m., McSorley radioed the Anderson to report that they were taking on water and had developed a list. Also at this time, he said that they had a fence that was down and 2 vents that were lost or damaged. And he was saying that they would slow the ship so that the Anderson could close the gap. Soon after, the U.S. Coast Guard issued a warning to all ships that the Soo locks were closed due to the storm and told everyone to seek safe anchorage. So already we can see that this is a pretty intense storm. Shortly after 4:10 p.m., McSorley contacted the Anderson and reported a radar failure and asked the Anderson to keep track of them. The Fitz slowed so the Anderson could keep an eye on them within their 16-kilometer radar guidance. The Anderson was guiding them for some time to the safety of Whitefish Bay. 4:39 p.m., the Fitz contacted the U.S. Coast Guard station at Grand Marais, Michigan, to inquire whether the Whitefish Point light and navigation beacon were working. The U.S. Coast Guard reported that both were inactive according to their systems. So then McSorley decided to hail other ships near Whitefish Point so that they could report on the state of the navigational aids. Captain Woodard of the Ava 4s reported between about 5:30 p.m. that the light was on, but there was no radio beacon. McSorley later told him that he had a bad list. He'd lost both radars and was taking heavy seas over the decks in one of the worst seas he'd ever seen. And so here is a point a lot of people use, this quote here from McSorley, saying that, yeah, this was a really bad storm, and the Fitzgerald unfortunately wasn't doing great, but they were doing their best to keep it through. So by late afternoon on November 10th, there were sustained winds of 93 kilometers per hour. The Anderson reported sustained winds at 107 kilometers per hour around 4:52 p.m. Waves increased to 7.6 meters, about 25 feet, around by 6 p.m. The Anderson reported later 130 to 139 kilometer gusts and rogue waves as high as 11 meters or 35 feet. At 7:10 p.m., the Anderson notified the Fitz of an upbound ship and asked how she was doing. This is when McSorley responded, "We are holding our own." And this was the last transmission. And she was never heard from again. No distress signal was sent. And about 10 minutes later, the Anderson lost the ability to reach or see her on the radar. And so finally, when that part cleared, about another 10 minutes later, Captain Cooper of the Anderson was looking for her and couldn't see her, either just looking out or even on the radar. Nothing. She was gone. So fearing the worst, he decided to radio the Coast Guard, and they said they had a missing ship. He first contacted them about 7:39 p.m. on channel 16, the radio distress frequency, but the Coast Guard responded back and told him to contact the non-emergency line, channel 12, as they wanted to keep the emergency line open, but they were also having difficulty with their communication systems. Cooper also contacted the upbound Nanfree to see if she could pick up the Fritz. To see if she could pick up the Fitz on her radar, but no luck. Cooper kept trying back the Coast Guard, but wasn't able to reach them again until about 7:54 p.m., at which time they told him to keep an eye out for a 16-foot boat that was lost in the area. At 7:25 p.m., Cooper contacted the U.S. Coast Guard again and expressed his growing concern about the Fitz. At 9:03 p.m., they finally reported her missing. Petty Officer Philip Branch said he considered it serious, but at the time it was not urgent. Then the Coast Guard didn't have appropriate vessels to search for the missing Fitz, so they asked the Anderson to help in the search. And although Captain Cooper was reluctant to head back out into that whole horrible storm, he did. Around 10:30 p.m., the Coast Guard asked all commercial vessels anchored in the area to assist in the search. The Anderson was joined by SS William Clay Ford and the SS Hilda Marjan, but they were hampered by the weather. Traverse City Coast Guard Station sent a plane to help search around 10:53 p.m. The Canadian Coast Guard aircraft joined the 3-day search, and OPP established and maintained beach patrol on the eastern shore in case anything washed up. They recovered a little debris, 2 lifeboats that were badly damaged, but no crew was ever found. On her final voyage, the Edmund Fitzgerald's crew of 29 consisted of the captain, the first, second, and third mates, 5 engineers, 3 oilers, a cook, a wiper, 2 maintenance men, 3 watchmen, 3 deckhands, 3 wheelsmen, 2 porters, a cadet, and a steward. Most of the crew were from Ohio and Wisconsin. Their ages ranged from 20, which was watchman Carl A. Bickle, and to 63, Captain McSorley. And so here are the names of the men lost at sea. Ernest M. McSorley, 63, Captain, Toledo, Ohio. John H. McCarthy, 62, First Mate, Bay Village, Ohio. James A. Pratt, 44, Second Mate, Lakewood, Ohio. Michael E. Armagost, 37, Third Mate, Iron River, Wisconsin. George J. Hall, 60, Chief Engineer, Cabot, Pennsylvania. Edward F. Binden, 47, First Assistant Engineer, Fairport Harbor, Ohio. Thomas E. Edwards, 50, Second Assistant Engineer, Oregon, Ohio. Thomas G. Haskell, 40, Second Assistant Engineer, Millbury, Ohio. Oliver J. Shampoo, 41, Third Assistant Engineer, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Frederick J. Beecher, 56, Porter, Superior, Wisconsin. Thomas Benston, 23, Oiler, St. Joseph, Michigan. Thomas D. Borgeson, 41, able-bodied maintenance man, Duluth, Minnesota. Nolan F. Church, 55, Porter, Silver Bay, Minnesota. Ransom E. Cundy, 53, watchman, Superior, Wisconsin. Bruce L. Hudson, 22, deckhand, North Olmsted, Ohio. Alan G. Coleman, 43, second cook, Washburn, Wisconsin. Gordon F. McClellan, 30, wiper, Clearwater, Florida. Joseph W. Mazes, 59, special maintenance man, Ashland, Wisconsin. Eugene W. O'Brien, 50, wheelsman, Perrysburg Township, Ohio. Carl A. Picol, 20, watchman, Ashtabula, Ohio. John J. Poviak, 59, wheelsman, Bradenton, Florida. Robert C. Rafferty, 62, temporary steward or first cook, from Toledo, Ohio. So Rafferty was actually a replacement cook. So the original cook from the ship, he was actually off with bone spurs. Then we have Paul M. Ripa, 22, deckhand, Ashtabula, Ohio. John D. Simmons, 60, wheelsman, Ashland, Wisconsin. William J. Spengler, 59, watchman, Toledo, Ohio. Mark A. Thomas, 21, deckhand, Richmond Heights, Ohio. Ralph G. Walton, 58, oiler, Fremont, Ohio. David E. Weiss, 22, cadet, on deck. Agoura, California. Blaine H. Willem, 52, oiler, Makwa, Wisconsin. So those are the 29 men that were lost. And before we leave it off today, I'm going to look at this one documentary that breaks down the weather a little bit more, just so we can get a little bit better of a picture of what was happening during that storm. And then next week we'll look more at the other documentaries that are looking more at the other events and mysteries surrounding this event. So the University of Wisconsin-Madison had an in-depth look at the storm. So they had a sort of little presentation, university night that they were doing. And they had a weather professor specialist there giving a talk. And so he says that although no cause has ever been determined for why the Fitz sank, we all know that it has something to do with the weather. And so we're now better able to analyze the radar and satellites with new info from NASA. And so this talk breaks down the weather events that led up to the sinking and how it was sort of basically this perfect storm, or like really bad storm. So on the morning of the 9th and early afternoon, the sun was shining and the water was calm. Captain Cooper of the Anderson actually reported that, it was a perfect day for sailing. And leading up to this, they actually had a bunch of days that were really nice. So you wouldn't expect that any storm was coming. But the radar and satellites now that we're able to go back and look at do show that something was forming. There was a low over the southern U.S. And they sort of talk about how now all these weather specialists and everybody know that sort of when those lows develop, they kind of curve around or hook and head up to the Great Lakes, and they actually call this the Panhandle Hook. So on the 8th, they could actually see this low that was forming, right down there in sort of that panhandle, like northern Texas kind of area. You can see that pocket of low forming. So on November 9th, that morning, it hooks up. The radar, when we look at it from November 9th, shows that the low was heading up to the Great Lakes and it was likely to develop. At 4 p.m., it had really developed and it was going to be intense. And then so at 7 p.m., the National Weather Service issued that gale warning. And so this is when it has sustained winds of 34 to 40 knots. And this was coming out of the northeast, as I was saying earlier. So that's why they were seeking the shelter of the North Shore, because as winds blow across the water, they actually create larger waves. So the more time the wind travels over the water, the larger the waves are going to get, the longer it's not only the distance, but the sustained amount of wind is increasing. So that's sort of what we're going to get to a bit later. So at this time, this was a good plan for them to head to the North Shore. And at 2 a.m., the National Weather Service increased its gale warning to a storm warning with the 48 to 50 knot sustained winds. At 7 a.m. on the 10th, the storm had fully developed sort of over Lake Superior with lots of wind and lots of precipitation. At 2:45 p.m., the winds had shifted from their northeast to 43 knots coming from the northwest, and waves of 12 to 16 feet. So now they weren't protected by the shores. So they were hit by huge waves that were building across the whole of Lake Superior. And it was at this time that Missouri reported to the Anderson they had a fence down, 2 vents damaged or lost, and the list. So during the day, the pressure was rapidly dropping, and then it went up and it was rapidly increasing. So on that increase, it meant that the worst was yet to come, and sort of in the middle of that increase is when we see that the Fitzgerald actually sank. So the storm was increasing, so did its winds, and thus waves. And then right after 7:10 p.m., when McSorley gave his "We are holding our own," there was another severe snow squall that blew in, and it cut visibility. So that's why at between that 7:10 and sort of 7:39 part, when the Anderson contacted the Coast Guard, you had that sort of little block about 10 minutes or so where they just lost visibility completely. Couldn't see the Fitzgerald looking out, couldn't see it on the radar because that snow squall actually kind of interfered with the radar, so couldn't see anything. So that's why the Anderson was asking other ships if she could see if they could see her on the radar, because they thought, oh, maybe our radar was also damaged due to the storm. But finally, when like around 7:30 p.m., the snow's cleared and the Anderson couldn't see the Fitz at all. So nothing popped back up on radar, and they couldn't see anything, but they could see off farther into the distance lights from other ships that were coming upbound. So this is really when they began to worry. So they called Coast Guard. They sent some boats but they were still worried about the storm. So this is why not a lot of response by the Coast Guard, just because they were still really dealing with the storm. And when they found the lifeboats, they looked like they had been ripped out of their holdings. There was just so much damage. They were just ripped right off the boat. So no evidence that somebody had actually tried to escape the Fitzgerald and go on the lifeboats. So that same day, November 10th, 1975, 2 people were swept off a pier and drowned in Grand Haven, Michigan. Also, the winds went all the way down to Buffalo, New York, and actually blew a woman off her second-story porch, and she died. So it was a brutal storm. But now, with better radar, satellites, and the American weather prediction models, we're now better able to predict and track storms and warn people in advance. So there you have a pretty good picture of everything that led up to when the Fitzgerald sank. And next week, we're going to look a little bit more at when she was discovered, the different dives they did to go down and search for her, and then a few other documentaries that I've looked at, which really describe like going into the theories of what could have happened, what happened to her. But one more interesting part I do want to touch on is the Gordon Lightfoot song. And so Lightfoot was inspired after reading the Associated Press report and like articles about the wreck, and so he wrote the song quickly to sort of honor the 29 men who died and capture the like eerie power of Lake Superior and the storms. And so they were able, as I was saying, like he wrote this quickly. So when he got everybody together and they went into the sound booth to record, this was the first time everybody had actually played the song together, and they got it like perfect on the first recording. And that's something that never happens. And when people are trying to redo the song or things like that, it's sort of hard to get the same sense because the music in itself is so eerie to really get into that feeling of like this eerie storm that they were in. A few other things about his song is that some of the lyrics were actually changed. And so next week we're going to be talking about the sort of U.S. Coast Guard Marine Board of Investigation report that was sort of put out in 1976 or finalized in 77, which sort of was listing the causes, like the findings and things like that, and sort of the theories behind of what they think would happen. But the main thing everybody seems to pull out of it is that it's because it's the hatch cover. It's the hatch covers that weren't properly sealed, and thus saying that it was, well, not saying, but sort of like implying that it was the crew's fault. And that's sort of something everybody kind of takes out of it. So it left a really bad taste in a lot of people's mouths, especially including the families. So in the original song, you'll probably remember that it says at 7 p.m. The main hatchway gave in, and he actually had that changed to at 7 p.m. it grew dim, And then he said, fellas, it's been good to know ya. So they just sort of changed that part a little bit because we didn't really know anything about the hatch covers, but also he just wanted to sort of change that for the family as well, just so that the family didn't sort of have to hear that and think that, like another person saying that it was that the hatches that weren't properly closed. So he did this to honor the families. And then another part in a like later on it says in a musty old hall in Detroit, and so this is the Mariners Church in Detroit. They were calling him up later and were like, our hall's not musty, so he then later changed it to a rustic old hall in Detroit. So that was another one of the lyrics that were changed, and so those are some of the changes that were brought about in Gordon Lightfoot's song. So you can listen to some of the earlier recordings of it and then some of the later performances and see if you can spot some of those lyric changes. And so that's where I will leave it off today. In the show notes, I will have a list of documentaries that I have found that were very insightful. So I will include that so that you can go and check them out if you want to learn a little bit more. But also stay tuned for next week's when we cover the second half of the Edmund Fitzgerald story. And so I hope you enjoyed today's episode. We will have a exhibit that will be launching on November 7th and going to about November 18th, I believe, and it'll be here at the museum, all about the Edmund Fitzgerald. So if you are in the Sioux during that time, please come and check it out. But as always, thank you for listening. Bye.
Did you know you can get unlimited admission to the Sault Ste. Marie Museum for a whole year for just $15? Yep, that's right, and there's more perks to that too. Go to Sault Museum, that's SAULT museum.ca, under Visit and learn more about our membership options. And if you're a business, corporate or nonprofit, we have plans for you too. Reach out to us by emailing info@saultmuseum.ca with any inquiries.